Hey everyone, it's Adios Amigo, and I'm bringing out this sort of shootout between very similarly spec'd IEMs. For the longest time, I was looking for information as to how these were actually all that different from one another. And I'm referring to the TFZ Live 3 and the TFZ number 3. And this is the, I think, 19th anniversary, not anniversary, like the 19th special edition black and gold. Um, so the interesting thing is when I bought them, the price was very comparable between the two IEMs. I think right now the Live 3 is significantly cheaper. Let me go double check that right now. Yeah, that's correct. Right now, the number 3 is about $110, and the Live 3 is $70, $69 at Linsel. So, first off, I'm going to say that as far as larger IEMs go, one of the most uncomfortable that I've ever worn was another TFZ called the Secret Garden 1. And I was kind of interested in the number 3 because the shape of it seemed a little bit more organic, like it would fit my ear a little bit better. And it did, actually. Both the Live 3 and the number 3 fit my ear very comfortably. I can wear both of them for a very long time. So comfort for both is great. And even the tips are the stock tips are pretty good. I didn't have to change these out at all. So both of these are wearing stock tips, silicon. I was able to get a good seal on both of them. So that's solid. And of course, they come with the 2-pin cables. I'm not going to say the cables are bad. They're not bad, but they're also not as comfortable around my ear. They have this rubberized coating on them, which isn't my favorite. It gets them to stick a little bit. They bounce. They have a bit of weight to them, so when I'm walking with them, it basically tugs on my ears a little bit. They work slightly loose. Not my favorite for wearing outside and actually being active with. If you're just like walking at a really slow pace, it's not as bad. But I found that my personal preference is to use these when I'm out doing something, but that something is not active. So before, the craziness of the last year, these are exactly the kind of things that I would have taken with me to a coffee shop or something like that. And just set it up either straight from my laptop, but more likely probably out of like my X Duo, XDO5, I think. Something like that. But yes, something out of like a mobile DAC amp. And these are frankly fantastic. It's kind of staggering. So I've been working on a much larger, sort of more expansive shootout of IEMs. My initial plan wasn't just to limit it to things within like certain designs, but more of like anything under $100. And so I was wearing a lot of IEMs recently. I was comparing these against like the Dunu Titan 1s, which are now the FIO EX one with a plastic instead of titanium housing. I was comparing them to some Nobles that I have, which the price has come down quite a bit on. And I also got one of the EDC Velvets back when they were still available, but I haven't seen them for a while since. I compared them against my Hyphaman RE600. I compared them against... I guess the was it BGVP DMG is now down to $100. When I bought them, it was just slightly above that, and those were kind of like my reference for favorite tuning under $100 or like under $125 or so. These are really good. These are really good. Are they better? I don't know. Yeah, value-wise, they're better. Raw performance, I don't know yet. But value-wise, they're better. I compared these against the TFZ S2 Pros, which I think are only like $25, and the Tin T2s, and even the Blonde BL03 and BL05. And, they all have their strengths and their weaknesses. But for me personally, just as like where I'm coming from, I tend to prefer kind of forward staging. I like the vocals to be really close, kind of like the Sennheiser sound for like the 58X and the 6XX. I like a little bit more bass emphasis for extension, not necessarily for the level, but I like to hear like that, that rumble, and I like to get that impact. And I like a clear treble. The one thing I cannot abide is a veil. I don't mind if it's toned down, right? I just don't like that sense like there's actually a layer of fabric between me and the treble, like I had in the Blonde. That's one of like the biggest cardinal sins for me when I'm listening to something. That's not true of everyone, but for me, that's a huge deal breaker. So that's my preference. I also like a really big stage, and one of the other deal breakers for me is when it starts sounding congested. When you have a lot of instruments coming out, or like a choir, and you have classical music, and you have like a full orchestra going, if it feels like when you're listening that the instruments or the voices are trampling over each other and drowning each other out, and it becomes this muddled mess, that's a deal breaker for me. I can't do that. These don't have that problem. Neither of them. And I'm going to start off right off the bat. These are very, very similar. Very similar. There's some, just reading off of, the spec sheet from the dealer, they both have 11? They both have 11.4 millimeter double magnetic drivers. They both do. They both have 108 dB. Yeah, they both have 108 dB sensitivity. The sensitivity is identical. The driver is the same size. I think they're using the same type of driver. So really, the only difference is going to be in the housing. And it does make a difference, surprisingly. And it's really more to your taste, right? So I'm just going to say that starting off, just off the bat, these two are more similar than they are dissimilar. I would say a good 65 to 70% of the sound between the two, right? They're clones of each other in a lot of respects. And so I'm gonna get into my methodology for this, because when you test something straight A and B back to back next to each other, you might be hearing differences that you wouldn't notice if you had just listened to one on its own, isolated from the other. And so I want both, right? I want to hear the differences, but I also want to hear fresh impressions as someone who is just coming to the IEM, how they would feel about it without having to force a comparison onto it with a competitor that someone else may not hear. Right? So I don't want to say, oh, this one's too boomy, the bass sucks, just because I prefer the bass on this. I wanted a fresh impression to get my feelings on it on its standalone. So what I did was I went through my classic set of songs on the number 3. I waited a day or two. I just kind of used speakers for a bit. I didn't wear any IEMs. Just watched some YouTube. Wasn't listening to a ton of music. And then it was kind of like a palate cleanse, right? And then after that, I came back and I did the song list with the Live 3. Did my impressions of that. And then I went back and did an A-B comparison between the two. And I compared not just my thoughts on the two different IEMs. I also compared my notes of my fresh impression on each of them. And so a lot of the notes ended up aligning between the two on my thoughts. And so I'm just going to go over the things they have in common first, and then I'll go over the differences, okay? So right off the bat, the stage on both of these is incredible. It's not the widest you'll hear, okay? I think the Secret Garden is a little bit larger of a stage, but it can take like a large presentation, like an orchestra, and it can put everything in layers, depth, width, and just kind of separate them all out into their own areas and not muddle the sound. So the stage, the imaging, the depth, the layering, I think surpasses even the BGV PDMG. In fact, I don't know of too many IEMs that do it in a way that's this pleasant. It's really engaging. It's really fun. It's really fun to listen to. Some people use the term musical. I think it would fit. I don't necessarily know that it's accurate. I suspect the soundstage should be bigger on some of the songs I listen to from where it was recorded. But I also have so much fun listening to this song that I do not care. And that's actually really hard because I'm a pretty clinical listener typically. So I was really happy with these. I'm flabbergasted by how fun both of them are to listen to. The stage, layering, imaging, yes, it's very good. It's very good. I think for a time, I was sort of entranced by the Blonde BL03 and BL05 for what they provided for the money. And they still do a good job for that. I'm not going to say they don't. But there's a level of finish, of nuance for the extra. I think the BL05 is like $50. This is worth the extra $20 upgrade, I think. For me, for the type of music I listen to, I had way more fun listening to my Live 3s. And the same is true of the number 3s too, but this is just the cheaper of the two options for value. So just I'm not saying I wouldn't get those two. I'm just saying for the value proposition, yes. The $20 is worth the extra. Just for the staging and imaging and the presentation. So I guess I could go through track by track. I start off with a Celtic link, right? Because I want to get a sense of that stage, that size, the image. I want to get a sense of how well it's going to layer and if it's going to get muddled. I want to hear how it handles voices, how it handles woodwinds, how it handles strings. The answer is good. It's not the most resolving, right? I'm not getting the level of micro detail that you might get with something like the Noble X. But it sounds natural. It sounds organic. It sounds real. Some songs sound like you are in the room, depending on the recording. And I love it. Now, I actually feel personally that you get more of that natural sound out of the Live 3 than the number 3, but we'll get to that later. Both of them, you can hear the treble, but it is slightly rounded off. Brass, you still get some of that energy. There's moments in Celtic Link where it just blazes through strong drums. You're getting this rumbling bass. It's fantastic. And the strings are going. You get bagpipes. You get flutes. There's a lot of times in this where the instruments in the bass and the treble have a chance to kind of overwhelm you. And they don't. They hit the right note of delivering the energy that you want, so it's not boring, but it's tamed enough where it's not also giving you a headache or making your eyes kind of like flinch. Your neck's not creaking to the side while you're trying to like process that information and in the form of pain. it's just really fun. It's incredibly well done. There's drums coming in, there's trumpets, there's guitars, and the instruments don't bleed together. You can hear exactly where they're coming from. You can like sort of figure that out, and it stays constant. It's not constantly moving around in the mix unless it's supposed to be. So it's fantastic. But the vocals in the Celtic Link aren't really center stage. So my next track goes to Dua Lipa, Don't Start Now. It's pop music, right? You're supposed to have more of that forward vocal, but you're also supposed to get some of that electronic bass going on. And they handle the bass. They extend, surprisingly, they extend well. I actually find the live extends a little bit better, and the bass is more tightly controlled. That's not to say this is bad, but it just feels a little bit looser. There's a little bit more boom, a little bit more bloom to the bass. But it's good. They both handle decay and reverb surprisingly well. I feel like the bass is a bit bumped in this, so you do notice the vocals are just a little bit recessed. Just a little bit. Not enough where, again, it feels boring. But the vocals are a little bit recessed compared to the bass in this. But it's still dang fun to listen to. Okay. And for me, one of the biggest tests really is Royal Crown Review's Beyond the Sea. I love the way that song was recorded because you can hear all sorts of crazy details in the song. And the imaging is such that there is actually just a band in front of you playing. The jazz hat is right where the jazz hat would be standing on the trumpet. The trombones, exactly where they're supposed to be. The saxophones, where they're supposed to be. The singer, it's like they're just laid out all in front of you, right? From left to right. They're laid out in front of you. And it just feels like there's a band playing in front of you. And this is one of those songs where you feel like you could be in the room. And jazz hat's one of those things where it can be really dull if there's not enough bass or if there's too much veil, or it could be too sharp if there's just an iota of too much treble emphasis. And it just nails it. It nails it. I feel like there is a little bit more treble energy coming out of the number 3 as I go through the songs than the live 3. Not in a harsh way either. So if you prefer just a little bit more extreme of like a V curve, I feel like the number 3 is more your go-to. I feel like the bass is just a tiny bit more boosted, and the treble is just a tiny bit more boosted, and the mids aren't any more recessed. It just feels that way because the bumps in the other areas. But again, I feel like the vocals aren't drowned out on either of these. They're more similar than dissimilar. So you start with that bass when I make these comparisons. And so I go to another brass song because I'm curious about the treble differences. And I confirm them in Real Big Fish. You Can't Have All of Me. The trumpets are really forward in that recording. And so it's not hard for it to just get pushed a little too far and to give you a headache. They don't do that. So I feel like both of them, even though there's a little bit more treble energy in the number 3, both of them handle it like they have just the right rounding off of the treble that makes it so perfectly warm for me. So it's almost like a warm V curve for both of these, which is just knocked it right down. It's perfect. It's perfect. Knocked it out of the park, I think, for the price point. So, let's see what else. So I tested the imaging accuracy. This I typically do with Michael Jackson's Thriller. There's a point in the intro, literally the first opening seconds of the song, where a wooden door opens, and then you hear footsteps across a wooden floor in front of you. And it's really weird how they recorded it. So the first 5 or 6 steps, right? It's very very even-keeled, very slow progress from right to center. But for some reason, when they get to center, to left, whoever is walking starts taking bigger strides, and the last 2 strides are the longest. So they end up traveling, let's say 6 steps to the center, and then it takes like 1, 2 small ones from center to left, and then 2 huge steps to almost bring you back all the way to the left. If you don't get that uneven sort of image of the steps in the song, the imperfection is the perfection, if that makes sense. You're looking for that unevenness. And you're also looking so that you actually hear center, right? If the right to left progress is almost instant to the middle, there's something wrong. It has to be very even, and it has to sort of slow down as you get towards the center and then speed up as you leave it. So these did it well. Both of them did it well. I don't think there's any winner here in that regard. They both did a fantastic job. In terms of detail, I did a lot of that sort of discovery from Koji Kondo. There's a recording of Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, orchestrated, Gerudo Valley, where it's like a string section is just playing Gerudo Valley. Fantastic recording. You can actually hear the bow strings, like friction rubbing against the strings of the orchestra. And when you get that sort of texture of that friction and you can hear the reverberation of the strings against each other, it's doing it right. These have that much detail, but I did notice that the little bit of extra treble that I was getting from the number 3s did help me hear just a little bit more of it. So, I think that both are still perfectly serviceable for orchestral music. Depending on what you're sensitive to and what you're looking for, you can season to your particular preference. The image still, again, wraps around wonderfully. I wrote that on both of the impressions, independent of each other. And it still has that sort of like warm, inviting sound without being boring. And again, strings can have a lot of treble energy, so it's good. It's a good thing. And new retro wave, Magnetron, I think the song is Kick Puncher Resolution. There's a really thick, heavy electronic bass they put in that song. And I noticed that it felt just a bit too pronounced and just a bit loose on the number 3. Whereas it felt more tonally balanced with the rest of the music, not overpowering. And it also felt better controlled on the Live 3. And so this is the song I used really to get that sense of it. And so, I mean, I went through the full, 15 songs. I found that, guitar sounds better. Just electronic guitar sounds just a little bit more energetic on the number 3 and just a little bit more natural and on the Live 3. So just, again, it depends on what you're looking for. Personally, if I had to choose between these, including the price point as a consideration, I would take the Live 3. For my personal taste, as for the tonal balance, I would take the Live 3. There's just something really syrupy and warm and inviting about it. It kind of reminds me of the LCD2C in that way, without like the discomfort and the very recessed mids. They're not that extravagantly recessed, but the bass also doesn't reach down as much or have as much impact. The decay isn't as well. Let's not go into it. It's a much more expensive headphone in a very different class, but the sound signature reminds me a little bit of the LCD2C. Not quite exactly the same. It's just a warm V curve. But it gives me happy memories the same way. They both do. So I mean, $410 at that point, you're getting close to like BGVP prices. The difference between them's not great. I feel like it's not like the difference in performance, the raw performance is not a large step from one another. And so it's a harder call. I personally just don't like the BGVP DMG because the filters, the bayonet, those lugs that screw in, the filters are so fine that they just started backing out. And it's just not been a good time. So I would, for that reason alone, I would probably go with these. But sound-wise, I think I might prefer the DMGs. But for $70, never mind that other stuff. For $70 to get where this goes, I don't think there's anything that I've heard yet under 150 that I would rather have than these, personally. The Noble X's are a little bit weird because I paid over, I think, like $200 for them. And for classical music, they're still probably my favorite. But that's for a very specific use. For everything else, like, I mostly listen to rock and pop and jazz and a little bit of classical here and there, I would rather, and the comfort. I like these. The only thing I would probably do is switch out the cable, which is kind of flimsy. I have a problem getting my ears into these because of how like hardened these rubberized cable covers are. Like it just snaps. It just snaps back into place, which is, it's not the easiest thing to get over your ear, but I make do. But as far as the differences between them more generally, I took some notes here, and slightly more treble, slightly warmer, but sounds more lifelike. Vocals have a bit more energy, but these sound more real. Oh, these do handle decay better. The reverb sounded more natural on these, on the number 3s. The bass is better controlled on the Live 3, but the number 3 has a little bit more bass boost, if that's your preference. The rumble on the number 3 sounds kind of bloomy in certain songs, depending on how much it pushes the bass. You do get more detail and texture from the number 3, and so it makes me think the V curve was just a little bit more extreme on the tuning. But again, I think these are using the same drivers, 11.4 millimeter double magnetic drivers. The sensitivity is almost identical, so you're going to be running these off the same devices. The impedance is exactly the same. You're just talking about a housing difference, really. And the difference between them is so minimal, to be frank. Yeah, it will make a difference depending on very extreme recordings, or it's pushing the treble, or it's pushing the bass. And depending on what type of preference you have for your tonal balance. But it's hard for me to imagine an instance where I would take the number 3 over the Live 3. I think for me, the Live 3 is the winner. And I mean, they're all, to me, also, like, the Live 3s are just more handsome, Like, I've been thinking about this for a minute now, and it makes me wonder, like, do I have any watches I could pair? What can I do for, like, wearing this out and about? Because it's almost like a fashion statement unto itself. You know what I mean? And so, I actually did this for both, depending on your own preference. So, one thing is that I have this Casio that I really like. Casio watch. And it has teal accents on it, which I think are really awesome. And I think it complements probably the... I think it complements the IEM quite well. Okay. See that teal? Or if you want to focus on the more marbled aspect of it, I have this TFZ mother of pearl. Where it kind of goes into a theme, you know what I'm saying? And for the black and gold, I have this Casio edifice. Again, you'll see a theme here with black and gold, right? And then a black strap with yellow stripes. And another one, but this one's more of like a dive wash style. Wow, that track is sticking, man. Boop, boop. So yeah, I accessorize my IEMs. I'm not ashamed. I'm not ashamed of who I am and what I do. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, as you can see, you know, I was level adjusting them by putting one in the topping, putting one in the THX 789, and then just kind of fiddling from there. But the differences are so small. The price difference is really the biggest part of it. Aside from minor tuning differences, which I happen to prefer on the cheaper model. So not everyone's going to have the same way, but just, you know, I figured I'd let you know my personal findings on these. And that's it. You know, that's the thing. I prefer the Live 3. There's the conclusion. You know, if you want to skip straight to this point, I should probably mark that in the video now that I think about it. Anyway, yes. And I think of any of the IEMs, like I said, any of the IEMs under like $150, these are probably my favorite. Yeah, these are probably my favorite. So I'm kind of wondering now if it's worth doing the shootout for all the other ones that I have, or, you know, the ones I mentioned, like the Duo Titan 1, what is it, the 10T2, the TFZ S2 Pro, the Blonde BL03, the Blonde BL05. I have the New Force EDC, which I don't even think they sell anymore, than the EDC3. And then, you know, some Nobles and the BGVP. Like, to be honest, unless you want like a super extreme V curve, or you want like absolute like hi-fi neutrality, if you just want something fun to listen to, you know, and just kind of enjoy the music, I'm going to go with these. So I don't know if it's worth doing all of those things on their own, you know? Like, sure, if you have some bass sensitivity, these aren't going to be the greatest thing because there is a bit of boost on the bass. So maybe I can break them out into reviews for that purpose. But anyway, that's the conclusion. Thanks for watching. This has been Audios Amigo. I hope you enjoyed, and have a good day.